It was a cold evening in the city. The streets were glowing with lights from cars, shops, and street lamps. But the air carried a chill that made people wrap their coats tighter. Big Shaq, known everywhere for his music and his famous Man's Not Hot vibe, was walking through the streets after finishing a long day of work. He had his hoodie up, headphones on, and his mind was busy with new ideas for songs and jokes. To him, it felt like just another night. One of those nights when you just want to get home and relax. As he walked down a quieter street, something caught his eye. On the corner, near a broken bench, he saw a small group of people huddled together under old blankets and cardboard boxes. Homeless people were not new to him. He had seen them before, just like everyone else in the city, but for some reason. He slowed down this time. Maybe it was the way the light hit one man's face, or maybe it was his gut feeling. Whatever it was, Shaq stopped walking and looked again. At first, he thought his eyes were playing tricks on him. The man's beard was long and messy, his clothes were worn out, and his shoes looked like they could fall apart at any moment. But behind the rough appearance, there was something oddly familiar about him. Shaq squinted, stepped closer, and then his heart skipped a beat. That face, he knew it. Memories started rushing back like pages turning in a book. He remembered sitting in a noisy classroom years ago, a younger Shaq cracking jokes while the teacher tried to keep everyone focused. That teacher had a voice, full of energy, a smile that showed patience, and eyes that always looked at students as if they had potential. And now, those same eyes were staring at the ground, filled with sadness. Shaq froze, his breath caught in his chest. This wasn't just any man on the street. This was his old teacher. He couldn't believe it. The teacher who once stood tall at the front of the class, the man who believed in discipline and respect, was now sitting in the cold with nothing but a blanket to protect him. Shaq's hands tightened into fists inside his hoodie pocket. He felt shock first, then disbelief, and then a heavy sadness. For a moment, he didn't know what to do. Should he walk away and pretend he hadn't seen it? Should he go up and say something? What if the teacher didn't even recognize him anymore? 100 thoughts rushed through his mind. But one thing was clear, he couldn't just keep walking. Shaq slowly took off his headphones and stepped closer. He could hear the man's quiet breathing, see the way his hands trembled from the cold. His heart was pounding. This wasn't how he ever imagined meeting his teacher again. He thought maybe one day he would run into him at a school reunion, or in a supermarket, or maybe even see him smiling in retirement. But not like this, not broken, not homeless. As Shaq stood there, he remembered the lessons this man once gave him. He remembered the way the teacher pushed him to do better, telling him not to waste his talent, telling him to stand tall even when life was hard. That teacher never gave up on him, even when Shaq was the class clown, making everyone laugh instead of doing his work. That teacher believed he could do something with his life. And now, here he was, sitting on the cold ground, alone and forgotten. Shaq felt something stir deep inside him. It was not pity, it was respect mixed with sadness. This was the man who helped shape his future. And seeing him like this was more than just painful. It felt wrong. The teacher shifted slightly, pulling his blanket closer around his shoulders. The movement broke Shaq out of his thoughts. He realized he had been staring too long. If he walked away now, he would carry this image with him forever. He couldn't allow that. He knew he had to speak, even if his voice shook. Shaq stepped closer, his shoes crunching against the cold pavement. The sound made the teacher lift his head slowly. Their eyes met. For a second, time seemed to stop. Shaq saw confusion in those tired eyes. Then a flicker of recognition, but also embarrassment. The teacher quickly looked away, ashamed to be seen in this state. Shaq swallowed hard. His throat felt dry, but he finally spoke. "Sir, is that you?" The words came out soft, almost like a whisper. The teacher didn't respond right away. He kept staring at the ground, his shoulders hunched. After a long pause, he nodded faintly. That tiny nod was enough to break Shaq's heart. In that moment, a flood of emotions rushed over him. Shock, sadness, guilt, and even anger at the world. How could someone who gave so much end up with nothing? How could life treat him this way? Shaq felt like crying, but he held it in. Instead, he took a deep breath and stood there, waiting for the teacher to say something. The silence between them felt heavy, but at the same time, it was powerful. Both of them knew this was not an ordinary meeting. This was fate bringing them together again. But under the most unexpected and heartbreaking circumstances, Shaq realized something important then. Life is unpredictable. The people who once helped us, guided us, and believed in us might one day need our help in return. And here he was, standing in front of the man who had once been his guide, now in desperate need of someone to see him. Someone to remember him, someone to care. And Big Shaq knew, deep inside, that this was only the beginning of a story he could never walk away from. Shaq stood frozen in that moment, the cold air biting against his skin, but he barely noticed it. All he could see was the man in front of him, the same man who once stood tall in the classroom, chalk in hand, teaching lessons about life as much as about books. The teacher didn't look up again. His head stayed bowed, his shoulders heavy with shame. That silence pulled Shaq into a storm of memories. As if the city around him had vanished and time had begun to rewind. He was no longer standing on a street corner. In his mind, he was back in school, sitting at a wooden desk. The smell of old books and chalk dust filling the air. The sound of boys laughing, pens clicking, and feet tapping filled the classroom. And right there, at the front, was the same man, Mr. Thompson, his teacher. Shaq could almost hear his voice again. It was strong, yet patient. "Focus, Michael," the teacher would say, using Shaq's real name, his eyes sharp but kind. "No, you can do better than this." Shaq smiled faintly at the memory. He had been the loud one in class, always joking, always making people laugh, sometimes even at the wrong time. But no matter how much he joked, no matter how many times he failed to bring his homework, Mr. Thompson never gave up on him. While other teachers rolled their eyes and called him lazy, this one teacher believed there was something more hidden. Inside him, he remembered a day that stayed with him forever. Shaq had come to school, tired and upset. His family had been going through hard times, and he carried that weight with him. He tried to cover it up with laughter, cracking jokes to keep people from noticing. But Mr. Thompson noticed. That day, after class, he stopped Shaq and said, "You don't always have to hide behind laughter. You're stronger than you think." Those words had cut deep, but in a good way. For the first time, someone saw through his mask. It gave him a sense of worth, a belief that maybe he could be more than just the funny guy. Now, standing in front of this broken man, Shaq realized how much those moments had shaped him. Without that teacher's encouragement, without those words of belief, he might not have chased his dreams. He might never have found the courage to become Big Shaq, to step onto a stage and make people laugh and cheer. The roots of his success traced back to this very man, now shivering on the cold ground. Shaq's chest tightened. The flood of memories didn't stop. He remembered the time Mr. Thompson defended him when other teachers wanted him punished for being too disruptive. He remembered the way the teacher clapped for him during a school talent show when most people thought he was just wasting time. He remembered the day the teacher told the class, "Education isn't just about books, it's about believing in yourself." Every memory painted a picture of a man who gave everything he had to his students, even when they didn't always appreciate it. And now, fate had brought them back together in the most unexpected way. Shaq felt anger at the world. How could someone who gave so much end up with nothing? Where was the system that should have protected him? Where were all the people he had helped over the years? The thought stung like fire. But at the same time, he felt something else: gratitude. Because standing there, Shaq realized he had a chance to give back. Life had placed this moment in front of him for a reason. The teacher once gave him hope when he needed it most. Now, it was his turn to return the favor. Shaq crouched down, trying to meet the teacher's eyes again. "Sir," he said softly, "do you remember me?" His voice shook slightly. The teacher glanced up, and for a split second, Shaq saw recognition flicker across his face. A tiny spark in those tired eyes. It was faint, but it was there. That look pulled Shaq deeper into the past tense, to every classroom laugh, every lecture, every lesson about never giving up. The flood of memories had done something powerful. They reminded Shaq not only of the man his teacher used to be, but also of the boy he once was, the boy who had needed someone to believe in him. And in that reflection, Shaq saw a mirror. His teacher needed him now in the same way he once needed his teacher. Shaq stood back up, his hands shaking, but his heart steady. He knew the night was no longer ordinary. He knew this encounter was not random. This was destiny pulling two lives back together at the exact moment when one needed the other most. As the cold wind blew and the city lights flickered around them, Shaq made a silent promise in his heart. He would not let these memories stay as just memories. He would turn them into action. He would not walk away this time. And in that promise, the story of kindness and redemption truly began. Shaq's breath fogged in the cold night air as he stood there, heart pounding. The memories were still echoing in his mind, but the silence between them grew heavier by the second. His old teacher, Mr. Thompson, kept his eyes fixed on the pavement as if the ground itself could swallow him and hide him from shame. Shaq wanted to speak, but the words felt trapped in his throat. For years, this man had been the one with the voice, the steady voice guiding noisy students, telling them to focus, teaching them lessons they didn't even realize they would carry into adulthood. And now, that voice was gone, replaced with silence that cut deeper than any words. Finally, Shaq took a small step closer. His shoes scraped against the pavement, and the sound made the teacher flinch slightly, as if he wasn't used to anyone approaching him kindly. Shaq's heart ached at that reaction. He bent down a little, trying to see the teacher's face. "Sir, do you remember me?" Shaq's voice was soft but shaky, like a student asking for permission to speak. Mr. Thompson slowly lifted his head. His eyes, though tired and dull, carried a flicker of recognition. He studied Shaq for a long moment, his lips parting as if to say something, but no words came. Instead, he looked down again, embarrassed. Shaq couldn't bear it. He crouched down fully now, determined to break the wall of silence. "It's me, Michael. You used to call me the Joker of the class." He gave a small smile, hoping to spark a memory. For the first time, a faint sound escaped the teacher's throat. It wasn't quite a laugh, but it was something close, like a ghost of a chuckle. "Michael," he whispered, his voice dry, as though the word itself carried both pain and surprise. "Yes, I remember." The moment hit Shaq like a wave. His teacher remembered him, even after all these years, even after life had broken him down. That tiny acknowledgement broke the silence, but it also broke Shaq's heart. "Sir, what happened?" Shaq asked, his voice trembling. How did it come to this?" The teacher's shoulders slumped even lower, as if the question weighed a ton. His hands, cracked and rough from the cold, tightened around the thin blanket draped over him. For a while, he didn't answer. The silence stretched on again. But now it wasn't the silence of strangers. was the silence of someone gathering, the courage to reveal their pain. Finally, his voice came out, low and broken. Life, it took everything away. I lost my job when the school closed, tried to find work elsewhere, but no one wanted an old teacher. My savings ran out. My family? He paused, his voice cracking. They drifted away when I couldn't provide anymore, one thing after another, until I had nothing left. Nothing. Shaq felt a lump in his throat. Each word carried the weight of years of suffering. This man, once so full of wisdom and strength, had been crushed by life's hardships. And yet, he was still here, still alive, still breathing. That, in itself, was strength. "Sir," Shaq said, his voice firm now, "you were the one who told me never to give up. You were the one who said a bad day doesn't mean a bad life. Don't you remember?" The teacher's eyes glistened with tears. He shook his head slowly. "It's easy to say those things when you're standing tall. It's harder when you've fallen this far." Shaq leaned closer, his tone almost desperate. "But you're still here. That means you haven't given up completely. You may have fallen, but you're still my teacher. You'll always be my teacher." The words seemed to strike something deep within the man. For a moment, he looked at Shaq with something more than sadness, something like hope, faint but real. His lips trembled as if he wanted to respond, but again, silence took over. Shaq reached into his pocket, pulled out a small packet of food he had just bought earlier, and held it out. "Here," he said gently. "Please eat something. You don't have to say anything. Just let me help." The teacher hesitated, staring at the food as if it was too much to accept. His pride and his shame wrestled inside him. But slowly, with shaking hands, he reached out and took it. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice almost breaking. That simple thank you was more powerful than anything else. It wasn't just gratitude, it was the first crack in the wall that life had built around him. Shaq sat down beside him on the cold pavement. He didn't care about his clothes or the people staring as they passed by. What mattered was breaking the silence completely, not with words alone, but with presence. By sitting there, side by side, he showed his teacher that he was not invisible, not forgotten, not alone. The city around them carried on, cars rushing past, people walking quickly, lights glowing. But for Shaq, the world had narrowed to this small corner, this broken man, and the bond they once shared. The silence was no longer heavy. It had changed into something else, an understanding, a connection. And Shaq knew, deep in his heart, that this was only the first step. The real journey was about to begin. The night felt colder, but Shaq barely noticed the chill. He was too focused on the man sitting beside him, his old teacher, once full of strength, now worn down by life. They sat quietly for a moment, the sounds of traffic and footsteps filling the space between them. The food in Mr. Thompson's hands trembled as he held it, almost as if accepting help was heavier than the hunger itself. Shaq broke the silence first. "Sir," he said softly, "you don't have to hide from me. You were always honest with us in class. Be honest with me now." What really happened? The teacher kept his eyes down, chewing slowly. It was as if the food was not just filling his stomach but waking up parts of him that had long been numb. His breathing grew shaky. He wiped at his eyes with the back of his rough hand, but the tears came anyway. Finally, in a voice that was fragile yet full of buried weight, he began to speak. "It didn't happen all at once," he whispered. "It was little by little. The school shut down, budgets cut, jobs gone. At first, I thought it was temporary. I told myself I'd find another teaching job soon. But months turned into years, and every door closed in my face." Shaq's chest tightened. He wanted to interrupt, to say it wasn't fair, but he held back. He knew the teacher needed to let it out. Mr. Thompson continued, his words halting. Each one pulled out like it hurt. I used up my savings. Tried small jobs here and there. Grocery stores, security shifts, but employers wanted younger workers. My body started failing me to back pain, exhaustion. Before I knew it, bills piled up. Rent went unpaid. I lost my apartment. Just like that, I was on the street. Shaq felt his fists clench. How could the world be so cruel? This was the man who had shaped young lives, who had given everything to education, and yet society had abandoned him like he was nothing. But the teacher wasn't finished. His voice grew even softer, almost breaking. And my family. He stopped, swallowing hard, his eyes glistening. They tried at first. They helped me when they could. But when the money ran out, when my problems became too heavy, they stopped answering. My children, they don't call anymore. They were ashamed of me. My wife, she left years ago. His voice cracked on the last word. He lifted his face just enough for Shaq to see the raw pain etched in every line. Oh, God, you was not just a man who had lost a job. This was a man who had lost his identity, his home, his family, everything that made life worth living. Shaq felt his throat tighten, his eyes burning with tears. He remembered being a boy, sitting in that classroom, watching this same man command. Respect, inspire laughter, and never give up on his students. To see him like this now, it was almost unbearable. "Asterisk, sir," Shaq said, his voice heavy with emotion. "You don't deserve this. Not you. You were one of the best teachers I ever had. You taught us more than lessons from books. You taught us how to believe in ourselves." The teacher gave a sad smile, weak and broken. "And yet, here I am, Michael. A man who couldn't even save himself. I feel like a failure." Those words cut deeper than anything else. Shaq shook his head fiercely. "No, you're not a failure. You gave so much. You planted seeds. In people's lives, seeds you may never even see grow. Look at my proof of that. You believed in me when nobody else did. That's not failure. That's greatness." The teacher looked at him, really looked at him, and for a moment his eyes softened. The mask of shame slipped, and Shaq saw the man he remembered, proud, wise, caring. But it lasted only a second before he lowered his gaze again. Shaq reached out and placed a hand gently on the teacher's shoulder. "You once carried me when I couldn't carry myself. Now, let me carry you." The teacher closed his eyes, a tear rolling down his cheek. "I never wanted my students to see me like this," he whispered. "It's the deepest shame I've ever felt." Shaq's grip on his shoulder tightened, steady and reassuring. "But I see you," he said firmly. "Not the clothes, not the street. I see the man who made me believe I could be more. And I'm not walking away this time." The words hung in the air, powerful and unshakable. For the first time in years, the teacher felt seen not as a failure, not as a burden, but as a human being who once mattered and still mattered. The painful truth had been revealed, raw and unfiltered. And though it broke Shaq's heart to hear it, it also lit a fire inside him. He knew now, without doubt, that he had a mission. This was not the end of his teacher's story, not if he had anything to say about it, and, as the night stretched on, Shaq silently promised that this painful truth would not be the final chapter. Shaq sat in silence after hearing everything. The weight of his teacher's story pressed down on his chest like a heavy stone. He couldn't stop replaying the words: losing the job, the family walking away, the shame of sitting on the streets with nothing left. Each detail cut deeper than the last. He looked at Mr. Thompson again, this man who once stood at the front of the class with so much authority, sitting hunched on the cold ground, shoulders bent as if life had crushed them. Shaq clenched. His jaw, no, this wasn't right. This couldn't be where the story ended. He remembered something his teacher used to say whenever a student was about to give up. Decisions shape your future. One good decision can change everything. And now those words echoed in Shaq's mind like a drumbeat. He realized this was his moment to make a decision. He could walk away and pretend it wasn't his problem. Or he could do what his teacher once did for him, believe, encourage, and lift him back up. There was no choice, really. His heart had already decided. Shaq straightened his back and leaned closer. "Sir," he said firmly, "I can't just leave you here. You don't deserve this life. Not after everything you gave." The teacher shook his head slowly, a weak smile on his lips. "Michael, you don't need to trouble yourself. I'm used to this now. People walk by every day. I don't expect anything anymore." Shaq's eyes burned with frustration. "No, I won't accept that. You told me once that I was worth something, even when I didn't believe it myself. Well, now, it's my turn. You are worth saving, and I'm not going to stand by while you give up." The teacher looked startled. No one had spoken to him like that in years, not with passion, not with conviction. His lips parted as if to argue, but the fire in Shaq's voice silenced him. Shaq stood up, his tall frame casting a shadow over the teacher. "Listen," he said, his voice steady. "I'm not rich like a king, but I have enough. I can get you food. I can find you a warm place to sleep tonight. And tomorrow, we'll figure out the next step. You're not alone anymore. Not while I'm here." The teacher blinked, stunned. His eyes filled with tears, but not of shame, this time tears of disbelief. "Why would you do this for me?" he whispered. Shaq crouched down again, his face softening. "Because you once did it for me. You might not remember, but I do. Every word, every time you believed in me, it's the reason I'm standing here today. You gave me hope when I had none. Now it's my turn to return it." The teacher's voice trembled. "But I've lost everything. My home, my family, my dignity. There's nothing left to save." Shaq shook his head firmly. "That's not true. You're still here, aren't you? As long as you're breathing. There's something to save, and I won't let the world throw you away. Not you." For a long moment, they just looked at each other. The teacher's tired, broken eyes staring into Shaq's determined ones. In that silence, something shifted. It wasn't loud or dramatic, but it was powerful. The teacher's shoulders lifted, ever so slightly, as though a tiny spark of hope had returned. Shaq felt his chest tighten, but this time with resolve, not sadness. He pulled out his phone and quickly called a contact he trusted, asking about temporary shelter options. He didn't care if it cost him money, time, or effort. He had already decided. This was the path he would take. As the call ended, Shaq placed a reassuring hand on his teacher's arm. "Tonight, you're not sleeping on this street. That's my promise." The teacher's lips trembled, and a single tear slid down his cheek. I don't know what to say." "Then don't say anything," Shaq replied gently. "Just let me do for you what you once did for me. Believe in me now." The teacher let out a shaky breath, almost a laugh mixed with tears. It was the first sound of relief Shaq had heard from him all night. Inside, Shaq felt something powerful awaken. This wasn't just about helping one man. It was about proving that kindness still mattered, that loyalty still existed, that a bond between teacher and student could survive even the hardest trials. As they stood together, preparing to leave the street behind, Shaq knew he had crossed a line inside himself. He wasn't just reacting to the situation anymore, he had made a choice. A choice to fight for his teacher, to restore his dignity, to give him back the hope he had once given a young boy who loved to make jokes in the back of a classroom. And deep in his heart, Shaq knew this was the start of something bigger than Either of them could imagine. The street was still alive with noise cars rushing by, people walking fast, neon lights glowing. But for Shaq, the world had shrunk down to one mission. He wasn't going to leave his teacher there. His decision was already made, and now it was time to act. "Come on, sir," Shaq said firmly, reaching out his hand. "Let's get you out of the cold." Mr. Thompson looked at the hand in front of him as if it were something strange, something he hadn't seen in years. His fingers twitched, hesitant, as if touching kindness after so long would break him. "Michael, I don't want to be a burden," he whispered. "You're not a burden," Shaq replied quickly. His voice carried the same strength he once used on stage, but this time it wasn't for laughs. Sit was for truth. "You're my teacher. You carried me once when I couldn't carry myself. Now it's my turn. Please let me help." Slowly, with trembling fingers, the teacher placed his hand in Shaq's. It was rough, cold, and weak, but the moment their palms touched, something powerful passed between them. It was as if years of silence cracked open, and for the first time in a long time, Mr. Thompson felt seen. Shaq helped him to his feet, steadying him as he wobbled. The teacher's legs, thin and weak from months on the street, struggled to support him. Shaq wrapped an arm around his shoulder, firm and protective, guiding him step by step. People passing by turned their heads, some in surprise, some in judgment. But Shaq didn't care. To him, this was the only thing that mattered. As they walked slowly toward a nearby shelter Shaq had found through a quick call, the teacher muttered under his breath, "I never thought one of my students would be the one saving me." Shaq smiled faintly. "Life's funny like that. You gave me strength back then. Now I'm just returning it. That's all." The teacher didn't respond, but Shaq could feel the slight weight of his head leaning against his shoulder. It wasn't just exhaustion, it was trust. When they arrived at the shelter, a warm light spilled out from the doorway. Volunteers stood inside, handing out blankets and hot meals. The smell of soup and bread filled the air, a comfort compared to the freezing streets outside. Shaq guided his teacher in, helping him sit down at a small table. A volunteer approached, smiling warmly, and placed a steaming bowl of soup in front of him. Mr. Thompson stared at it for a long moment, his lips trembling. "It's been so long since I sat at a table," he whispered. Shaq sat across from him, watching as the teacher lifted the spoon with shaking hands. Each sip seemed to bring life back into his face, color returning little by little. Shaq felt relief wash over him. "It wasn't much, but it was a start, you know," Shaq said. "Quietly, you once told me small steps matter more than big leaps. One step at a time, right? This is your first step." The teacher set the spoon down, staring at Shaq with watery eyes. "Why do you remember so much?" "Most students forget their teachers after they leave." "Because you weren't just a teacher," Shaq replied. "You were the voice in my head that told me not to quit. Every time I thought I couldn't do something, I remembered your words. That kind of thing you don't forget." The teacher's hands trembled again, but this time not from the cold. "I thought I failed," he said softly. I thought I gave my life to a job that abandoned me. But hearing you say this, maybe I did leave something behind." "You left more than something," Shaq said firmly. "You left pieces of yourself in every student you taught. You changed lives. And now, I'm here to remind you of that." For the first time that night, Mr. Thompson smiled an honest smile. Small, but real. It was faint, but it was there, shining through the cracks of pain after the meal. Shaq spoke with the shelter staff, arranging a safe bed for his teacher to sleep in that night. They promised to keep him warm, fed, and cared for. But Shaq wasn't finished. He slipped a small envelope of money to the staff quietly, making sure his teacher would have extra support in the coming days. When he returned to the table, the teacher looked at him with confusion. "Why are you doing all this, Michael? You don't owe me anything." Shaq leaned forward, his voice gentle but firm. "Maybe not. But sometimes in life, we don't help people because we owe them. We help them because it's the right thing to do. And for me, it's more than right, it's personal. You were there for me when nobody else was. Now, it's my turn to stand for you." The teacher lowered his head, tears slipping down his cheeks. He whispered one word, broken but full of gratitude. "Thank you." Shaq placed a hand on his shoulder again, steady and strong. "This isn't the end, sir. This is just the beginning. Tonight, you're safe. Tomorrow, we'll start fresh." And, as the teacher finally lay down on a clean bed inside the shelter, his eyes heavy but peaceful, Shaq stood by the doorway watching. For the first time in years, his teacher looked like he could sleep without fear. Shaq's heart swelled with determination. This was more than a helping hand. This was the first step toward giving a man back his dignity, his hope, and maybe even his life. The next morning, sunlight streamed softly through the small shelter window. For the first time in years, Mr. Thompson woke up under a roof, wrapped in a clean blanket, not a thin sheet of cardboard. He blinked against the light, his body stiff but warm. For a brief moment, he thought it was all a dream. But then he saw Shaq sitting nearby on a chair, half asleep, arms crossed, keeping watch. The sight nearly broke him. No student had ever done this for a teacher. No one, in all his years of teaching, had shown up like this. Shaq rubbed his eyes, grinning when he noticed his teacher awake. "Morning, sir. How was the bed?" Mr. Thompson chuckled weakly. "It felt like heaven. I almost forgot what it was like to sleep without fear." Shaq nodded. "Good, because this is just the start." That day, Shaq took his teacher to a small cafe nearby. They sat down at a table by the window, sipping warm tea. The teacher hesitated at first, nervous about being seen, but Shaq reassured him. "You don't need to hide. You have nothing to be ashamed of." As they talked, Shaq pulled out his phone. He began recording a short video, not for fame, but to share the truth. He explained how his former teacher had fallen on hard times, how the man who once inspired him was now living on the streets. He spoke with raw honesty, his words filled with love and respect. "This man believed in me before anyone else did," Shaq said into the camera. "Now, it's time we believe in him." Shaq uploaded the video that same day. Within hours, it spread across social media. People recognized Big Shaq, but more importantly, they recognized the story. Thousands of comments poured in messages of shock, compassion, and offers to help. Some wrote about their own favorite teachers. Others shared how badly the world treated people who gave their lives to education. By the evening, donations began arriving. Food, clothes, money people wanted to give back. News outlets picked up the story, calling it a reminder of humanity's hidden heroes. When Shaq showed the messages to his teacher, Mr. Thompson's hands trembled. "All these people, they care about me?" Shaq smiled. "Of course they do. You touched lives, sir. You just forgot how much you mattered." But the world hasn't forgotten. The days that followed were a whirlwind. With the donations, Shaq arranged for new clothes, medical checkups, and even counseling sessions. Slowly, Mr. Thompson's appearance began to change. His beard was trimmed, his face cleaner, his posture straighter. Each step restored a piece of the dignity that life had stripped away. But more than the outside, it was the inside that transformed. The teachers started talking more, laughing at old stories, sharing memories of the classroom. The students he once taught began reaching out, sending letters and voice messages of gratitude. One wrote, "Sir, you once told me I wasn't stupid when I failed a test. That kept me going. Today, I'm a lawyer. Thank you." Another said, "You believed in me when no one else did. A T I never forgot." Each message lit a fire inside the teacher's heart, slowly stitching back the pieces of his broken spirit. One evening, as Shaq walked with him through a park, Mr. Thompson stopped suddenly. He looked at the children playing, their laughter filling the air, and then turned to Shaq. "You know, I thought my story was over. I thought the last chapter had already been written. But maybe I still have something left to give." Shaq nodded proudly. "That's the spirit I remember." "You're not done, sir. You've just started a new chapter." Soon, with the help of donations and community support, Shaq arranged a small teaching opportunity at a local community center. It wasn't a big school with hundreds of students, but it was enough. When Mr. Thompson stood in front of a group of young kids again, chalk in hand, his eyes sparkled. His voice, once cracked with despair, grew strong and steady. Shaq watched from the back of the room, his heart swelling with pride. He saw his teacher come alive again, doing what he was born to do, teaching, inspiring, shaping young minds. The road to redemption wasn't about money alone, wasn't even about shelter or food. It was about restoring purpose, dignity, and hope. And step by step, Shaq had helped guide his teacher back to the path he thought he had lost forever. That night, after class, Mr. Thompson placed a hand on Shaq's shoulder. His voice shook with emotion as he said, "Michael, you didn't just save me. You reminded me of who I am. I will never forget this." Shaq smiled, his eyes glistening. "Neither will I, sir." Neither will I. The journey wasn't over. There were still struggles ahead, challenges to face. But now, they were walking the road together, not as teacher and student, not as homeless man and celebrity, but as two human beings bound by respect, kindness, and unbreakable loyalty. And for the first time in years, Mr. Thompson didn't feel invisible anymore. He felt alive. Asterisk. Weeks had passed since that cold night when Shaq first saw his teacher on the street. So much had changed since then. Mr. Thompson was no longer the man hiding under a torn blanket in the shadows. He had fresh clothes, a clean face, and most importantly, a spark in his eyes that had been missing for years. Shaq had kept his promise. With the help of donations, community support, and his own determination, he gave his teacher more than shelter. He gave him back his dignity. And now, the man who once taught lessons in classrooms was standing tall again, teaching children at the community center with the same passion as before. One evening, after a long day of lessons, Shaq walked into the center to find his teacher, surrounded by kids, their eyes wide with curiosity as he explained something on the board. His voice was strong, steady, full of life. The children listened as if every word was gold. Shaq leaned against the doorway, watching with pride. It felt like time had rewound, back to when he was just a boy sitting in that same kind of classroom, hearing the same voice telling him he was more than just the class clown. But now, it wasn't only Shaq who was learning, it was a whole new generation. When the class ended, the kids clapped and laughed as they packed their things. One of them tugged on Mr. Thompson's sleeve and said, "Sir, I want to be a teacher, like you one day." The words hit him like sunlight breaking through clouds. For years, he had thought his life no longer mattered. And now, here was a child, ready to follow his path. Tears pricked his eyes as he smiled and patted the boy's shoulder. "You can be anything you set your mind to," he said softly, his voice full of pride. As the children left, Mr. Thompson turned and saw Shaq standing there. Their eyes met, and for a moment, no words were needed. But then, slowly, the teacher walked over, his steps steady. "Michael," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I don't even know how to thank you. You didn't just save me from the streets. You saved me from losing myself. Shaq shook his head, smiling warmly. No, sir, you saved yourself. All I did was remind you of the man you already were. The teacher's lips trembled. Do you know what it means to me, to stand in front of a class again? I thought my story was finished, but because of you, I get to write new pages. You gave me back my purpose. Shaq felt his throat tighten, but he forced a smile. You gave me purpose first. When I was lost in jokes and trouble, you believed in me. You planted seeds, sir. I just watered them. And now, I'm giving you back the same gift. The room grew quiet, the air heavy with emotion. Finally, the teacher placed both hands on Shaq's shoulders. His voice cracked as he whispered, I once told you never to give up on yourself. And tonight, I want to tell you this: you never gave up on me. You became the kind of man every teacher dreams their students will be. Shaq couldn't hold back the tears anymore. They both laughed through the emotion, hugging tightly, student and teacher. Two lives tied together by fate and loyalty. That moment was more than gratitude. It was full circle. Years ago, in a small classroom, a teacher had planted hope into a boy who loved to laugh. And now, that same boy, grown into a man, had returned that hope when the teacher needed it most. The bond between them was proof that kindness never disappears. It circles back, sometimes years later, in ways no one can predict. As they stepped outside, the evening sun painted the sky orange and gold. Children ran past them, laughing, their future bright and open. Shaq looked at his teacher and smiled. See, sir, the world hasn't forgotten you, and it never will. Mr. Thompson's eyes glistened as he nodded. Because of you, Michael, because you remembered me. They walked side by side, no longer just teacher and student, but equals friends, bound by something stronger than time. And deep inside, both of them knew the truth. Sometimes life takes everything away, but one act of kindness can give it all back. What began as a painful encounter on a cold street had transformed into a story of hope, redemption, and love. And for everyone who heard it, the message was clear. Ever underestimate the power of compassion. One helping hand can change a life. And as Big Shaq walked away with his teacher at his side, the world felt just a little bit brighter.